Hi, my name is Michael Wilson. I'm the MEC Communications Committee Chairman, and this is a live town hall. And I can't stress enough that this is live. It will not be perfect, but this is an attempt to give you, the pilots, as much information as we can in the most transparent manner as possible. With me today, Captain Garth Thompson, MEC Chairman, Phil Otis, Negotiating Chairman, Dave Smith, SPSC Chairman, and Andy Riggs, Vice Chairman of the Negotiating Committee. We will start with an opening statement from Captain Thompson.
Thanks, Michael. To everyone that's tuned in, I just want to thank you for investing your time with us today. And to everyone that's emailed questions and comments, I appreciate the effort. You may still send us an email over the next hour plus, and we'll do our best to get to everything that is sent in. Due to the several emails on a few different subjects, I'm going to discuss a few of them up front. Probably the most prevalent issue centers on the strike authorization vote that the MEC gave me a couple weeks ago. And while I know there are many of you that, like me, are ready to vote yesterday for this measure, I ask you for some patience. We want to make sure the entire pilot group is ready for this vote. We're currently conducting polling, and that polling will wrap up this week, and there is a question on that issue in the polls. The Strategic Preparedness and Strike Committee will be conducting an education campaign on the issue to stress the importance of the strike vote and the need for full participation. I also want you to know that I won't needlessly be delaying this vote, and I fully intend for it to take place. But I want us all to be ready to participate and all to be on the same page for that. The next issue that is very prevalent with us is mediation. And that's another hot topic, with many of us wondering when or if we will file for mediation. And to be blunt, I believe we should have gone to mediation a year and a half ago, but we did not. And we ended up with a tentative agreement that was voted down. And we subsequently made many changes internally within our union and restarted negotiations on February 10th. And the MEC thus far has decided that it'd be most advantageous for us to negotiate outside of mediation and try to reach a quick agreement. That's been a discussion at the last few MEC meetings, and I think that will continue to be the case every time the MEC meets. And so there's a chance that we will end up in mediation. There's also a chance at this point still that we will reach an agreement outside of mediation. Next issue that's been a hot topic lately, and certainly yesterday and today, is the age 67 rule, and the change to age 65, I should say. We've been told that yesterday the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee voted to change or add an amendment to the FAA reauthorization bill, changing the rule to age 67. That will be a subject of debate in the Senate as well. And many pilots have reached out to me frustrated that ALPA opposes this legislation. And I just want to give a little background on that. This, while it didn't come out of the United Pilot Group, this came through the ALPA democratic system. And it was an item that the executive board passed to be policy. And in October, it went to the board of directors, which was, if you don't know, the ALPA board of directors is every MEC member of every airline. And ALPA voted this to be ALPA policy, to be in opposition to the change to the age 65 rule. And so the MEC at United, and certainly me, I do not have the authority to, by myself, do anything different. So I've always encouraged people that if you want a change in this democratic organization, you start at the local council meeting with a resolution on the item and get it to your MEC, which will move it up the chain. That said, it may may be out of our hands regardless of how we feel on the issue, right? It's now going to be a Senate debate, and we'll see where the issue goes. It'll probably be decided one way or the other before anybody has a chance to change out a policy anyway. So another issue that was certainly big in the news yesterday is our CEO, Scott Kirby, was quoted in the media saying that they have a proposal on the table that's currently industry leading and that it's worth over $8 billion. In negotiations, it's not uncommon for the union and the management to disagree on the valuation of proposals, and certainly this is no different. We value their proposals far different. Our economic and financial analysis department views it as certainly something far less than $8 billion. And when you look at the fact that their proposals have provisions for long-term disability, sick leave, profit sharing, quality work-life provisions that don't exceed or even meet deltas, it's hard to imagine how it can truly be an $8 billion offer. As far as PDAP or BNC fund contributions, they're still in opposition to that being a part of profit sharing and long-term disability or retro, which is something that's in the Delta agreement. However, one thing that's pretty easy to evaluate is we have the highest paid CEO in the airline industry, and we do expect to join him at the top of our industry as far as pilot pay and contractual value. And until we do, we will continue to fight for that contract, and we will continue to have captain vacancies go unfilled in large numbers, which threatens United's next growth strategies. So anyway, those are the items I wanted to take on up front before we go to questions, and I'll kick it back to you, Michael.
Well, let's just jump right in. So as these questions come through, I want you to realize that we're not going to stay on any one subject at the same time, right? The questions are random. We will answer them as they came in, and we'll answer them live as well. So the very first question is one that every pilot wants to know, and it's simple. It's to you, Garth. And have you been speaking directly with Scott Kirby? And is he involved directly in any of these negotiations?
The answer to the second part of that question is no, not yet. While I envision, however, that at the end game of this negotiation, there will probably be several discussions between Mr. Kirby and myself personally. Right now, we do converse. Today, we exchanged several text messages more in terms of what was going down in Congress. But also, I do anticipate having continual conversations with Mr. Kirby going down the road. Obviously, I sit on the United Airlines Board of Directors, and because of that, I interact with Mr. Kirby frequently, and we'll continue to do that. And I'll take his call anytime if it's constructive towards an agreement.
So let me ask you, just as a follow-up question, Phil, do you see, is this an impediment? Does it slow you down?
That Mr. Kirby's not involved directly?
Absolutely.
No, I think Garth kind of gave that some good background, right? It's not atypical for the very top leadership to be involved in negotiations in the beginning, perhaps, or at some stages along the way. But at the point that we're in right now, I wouldn't expect to see him yet. We're getting closer. You know, we're down from 320 plus items in the beginning of the year to circling around the last 50 or so items. And at some point, the economic value coupled with those final quality of work life closeout items is going to have to happen. And I would suspect that that will be a decision that Mr. Kirby will be involved in directly. We may see him at the table at some point.
So I remember when we were talking back in February, we were in Denver for the negotiations. And one of the criticisms that we said about the company is, hey, you're not bringing the resources to the table. And we weren't talking about resources of specific items. We were talking about people. Were the right decision makers coming to the table? Are we seeing that now? Are the right people coming to the table and talking to you? And are they the ones that can make decisions?
So that's a great question and a slightly different the perspective on that, right? So what we were talking about back then was the ability to deep dive into particular items where the company had perhaps held out against us on a more philosophical level, be it more days off for schedules or other reassignment statistics, things like that. So when we needed the right people, we needed both the right people at the lower level that were the subject matter experts on the company side so that we could have detailed conversations with our own subject matter experts from our various committees that are involved in supporting us in those areas. And then at the other end, we needed the people that were willing to be able to say, okay, we understand what our subject matter experts are telling us collectively, and now we can negotiate with you with relevance rather than holding out on positional values. Like, we don't believe in more days off. Well, tell us why, or we'll tell you why more days off makes sense. A very simple example, but
awesome. Garth, for you, you mentioned in your startup here, your brief about mediation. So if mediation is our future, hopefully it's not, maybe it is, I don't know. What is the timeline? How does this work? I know there was a resolution in the last MEC meeting. It was voted against by the MEC. Obviously that's not a forever pill there. It comes back. What's your timeline? What do you see as that?
There is no timeline for mediation. It will be, as I discussed before, probably a topic of conversation every time we meet as an MEC, and perhaps in between. I believe the primary consideration for the MEC when it comes to mediation is an evaluation of, are we continuing to move toward an agreement, or are we reaching a point where the MEC feels like there will be no further movement, or at least not enough movement to get us to a ratifiable and industry-leading agreement without mediation? So that will be something that the MEC will continually evaluate.
So just because this is a live, they do want to know where you got your tie. So Dave Smith, we come to you, SPSC chairman. Let's talk about a strike vote. You have a strike authorization vote that was passed by the MEC unanimously. Can you give me some timing? Give us an idea of when that starts?
Well, obviously, as Capt. Thompson has relayed, the timeline, while not defined at this point, is certainly it's front row center. In terms of the specifics of how it works, obviously the MEC gave Capt. Thompson the authorization to call for the strike vote, and that was done exactly 2 weeks ago. We understand that this vote is not merely not symbolic. It's not theater. This is meaningful, and the reason is because the authorization for the strike that you would be voting on continues. There is no expiration of that vote, so it could carry through to the very, very end. Meaning self-help. So it is an incredibly meaningful vote, and the education campaign to ensure that our members really know what they're voting on is absolutely vital.
So when you say that, just to clarify for everyone, this vote is the strike vote.
Correct.
There you go. So Phil, I understand that our negotiations are saying that negotiations are based on what the pilot group has asked for. That being said, after going on, this pilot says after 38 years, he can't help but feel that maybe we're asking way too much. There's rumors out there that we're 20%, we're 30% above Delta, we're 5% above Delta. Where's the reasonableness? Where are we on that?
So
sorry to throw that at you.
That's quite a wide range of percentages of Delta plus, right? So all in all, it's a comprehensive, even with only 50 items, the remaining items still touch on so many areas that remain open in the contract. Unfortunately, and both, I suppose, in a way that helps to explain part of why we're still negotiating these items, while we're very close in many of them, and quite a few of them are fully agreed, except for maybe one or two little sub items. A major area remains the economics, and part of it. Part of the knowing that the economics typically comes last, that's an area that, I prefer not to divulge openly right now. And I hope that our pilot group will understand the sensitivity of that in terms of us maintaining an aggressive ask while we work on the quality of life items and the other items that have to be balanced with what our economic ask is going to be. At the end of the day, though, our goal is to not just be competitive, But in an effort to be industry leading, we have a couple of things that are important to us to watch out for. Primarily, it's a return to this cyclical pattern bargaining, where we improve upon the industry so that those that follow us have something that's higher than what the last pilot group just agreed to be able to aspire to and hopefully improve upon that. Right? It's not if we can be industry leading and then the next group that comes after us jumps on top of us, that's not a defeat for us. That's a victory for the industry as a whole. And so we're going to maintain that aggressive ask in pursuit of that goal until it's, well, as I say, we're going to maintain it right until the end. We will adjust our ask as necessary to maintain that industry leading value when the time is appropriate.
And I guess that to throw in there, the MEC has been very upfront about what they expect. In the MEC meetings, they give you direct feedback and direction. Let's talk a little bit about, so we've done some polls, we've done some surveys. Those pilots that answered that survey, those answers went directly on to what you were asking for at the table.
That's correct. And also a large part of why we're continuing to survey, and we'll be starting, if it hasn't started already, the follow-on questions that'll be, again, are either out right now or out very shortly. Those will help fine-tune what we have polled in the past. It's not a new poll, it's an update to questions that we've already polled.
So let me ask you then, when, Garth, so is there any chance that we wait for Americans' ratification vote? Does it slow us down at all? Does it change the timing of any of this?
No, it doesn't. To be candid, we are continuing to negotiate as if that never happened. We will, that won't be a consideration. When we reach a tentative agreement or an agreement in principle prior to that, we will continue to evaluate that with the MEC and roll it out for membership ratification if we get that far with it, regardless of where other airlines are with their votes.
Dave, live question here. The education campaign for the strike vote. When do you anticipate that education plan begins?
The website basically is launched, and there'll be a lot more meat put on that bones. Just like there's a tab, you'll be able to hit the strike authorization vote tab. That's the education piece. And a lot of the data, which I have here, the specifics, the exact what it is, as well as the education for the family and for all of us to understand exactly what we're doing with that vote. And like I say, we're taking it seriously. So expect a lot of information, just like our RLA campaign shortly.
A question we get a lot, Phil, and as I went through and I'm hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of questions that we have received. This is a frequent flyer here. Are we going to change our sick leave program to the Delta program? Are we keeping our sick leave? How's that going at the table?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually on my top 3 list. So yes, we're all aware of and we get that question asked of us quite a bit from individual pilots, and it's also come through the councils and at the MEC table. And the short answer is that we are not going to adopt the Delta program, simply bringing it lock, stock, and barrel over. What we have looked at in exhaustive detail is not just what the typical experience of a Delta pilot looks like under their program, but also what areas their program solves that our program is missing. And primarily it's looking at how a pilot transitions from using sick leave for ordinary life happenings and for maybe more major events that lead into short-term disability and long-term disability, and having a comprehensive bridge, a protective program that takes into account the opportunities for loss of income that our pilots currently experience at a greater level than our Delta peers. So our program is our proposals are looking at improving the current program that we have as an accrual program, instituting a program for that short-term disability or filling in that waiting period, and also enhancing our long-term disability program.
So let's bring in a question for Captain Andy Riggs. In one of the negotiating notes emails, it was stated that one of the agreed upon items was reserved day-for-day trades. What does that mean?
Yeah, so reserved day-for-day trades, what what pilots are likely referring to there is a reserve pilot's ability to rearrange their schedule post PBS. The contract allows that currently with crew desk discretion. What we see there is that typically means long hold times. And then once you get through to the crew desk, it's at their discretion. So it's going to have to do with reserve pool coverage and also the individual scheduler's level of comfort with what they're willing to trade. In all areas, we seek to honor seniority. We seek to avoid favoritism. And frankly, in this day and age, we look to avoid manual transactions and go to electronic transactions if we can. So what we're looking to do in our proposal with the company is to automate this to allow reserves to have a similar experience that line holders have, the ability to submit those trades and for those to be processed in an order that honors seniority and provides for more transparency in those transactions. Lastly, one of the issues that we have today is if a pilot calls up and is trying to trade the 17th for the 28th, for example, and the coverage doesn't allow, and the very next pilot on hold is trying to trade the 28th for the 17th, both those pilots would be denied today. We're looking to go to a system that would allow those day-for-day trades where pilot matches would occur and allow them to modify their schedules.
So a live question here for both Phil and Garth here. With all the pilot hiring and aircraft orders that are coming, how are we as an MEC expressing this in a practical way at the negotiating table?
It's an interesting question. I guess at least from my perspective, what that means is that right now we have a fairly competitive hiring marketplace for pilots. And as we are sitting with our contract, being one of the two last to reach an agreement, we are not a competitive employer presently. And as I spoke to before, we also have quality of work life provisions such that not enough pilots are willing to become reserve or junior captains. And until that is fixed with our contract and we have many quality of work life improvements achieved and some more yet to achieve, that will solve some of that problem and allow the company to pursue the growth plans that they've laid out with this United Next plan.
You see it at the table?
I had not much to add to what Garth explained, but yes, we absolutely see that at the table. The primary focus, I think, right now for the company is, for them, it's how to execute on their United Next plan, right? And that's led to our lanyards explaining perfectly what we think the best tool that we can provide for them there that will allay their concerns is that let's get this contract done.
Captain Smith, I'm flying with a junior first officer, and they're of the mindset that they can't afford to strike. These same individuals will be the new additions to my master scab list. My question is, what's being done to educate these new pilots about the Continental Strike, the United Strike, and the karma and stigma that will destroy the work environment in their careers?
That's a good question. In terms of the loose use of the word scab, that is reserved for one thing and one thing only. It's simply defined. In terms of educating the more junior element of our seniority list, and frankly, all of us, very few on this property have experienced a true work stoppage. We've done our best to give them a little bit of history, and I just think that the best thing we can do is with the education on the strike authorization vote is to ensure that they understand the importance that it holds for that vote and the fact that we need to prepare now. It's quite simple that we don't know where this is ultimately going, and we should be, just as pilots do, prepare for plan B, C, and D, and that really involves your family. And because with their support, you can afford, if you will, to make the right decision at the right time. So today is already getting to be a bit late.
The vote happens at the dinner table.
Absolutely.
Phil, the company has indicated on several occasions that our scheduling ask will make it impossible or very expensive to operate. Can you give us an idea of the ALPA and company estimated manpower effect on scheduling, vacation, sick asks if they're implemented?
I can give a broad idea, and I'll do my best. So that has been a refrain from the company, since we've re-engaged them as far back as last August. That what we were asking for above and beyond the failed tentative agreement from last summer was going to be difficult for them to somehow embrace, and that continues. But at every step of the way, we make progress. We get closer on some of these quality of work life, very important topics. And I think, without trying to enumerate the various, there are many of them, and they're in the position report. For those of you listening, please look at that and refresh the long list that I would like to hesitate. I hesitate from trying to go over it here just for time management. However, many of the items are staffing positive. In other words, they will require a greater amount of staffing as the company implements them and continues to operate. The company answer to us has also been that, well, United Next is what takes care of that. And we believe that too, that as we want the company to be successful, we want them to grow, and we realize that we're going to have staffing increases that are just the nature of increasing the operations of the company in pursuit of this growth goal, right? Not just in pursuit of any work rule changes; those go hand in hand with it. And so far to date, that has been an underlying tenet of our focus in terms of not succumbing to perhaps the fear that if we're asking for too much and it's too staffing intensive or positive, that it somehow is going to be a failure of ours. That's absolutely not the case. I think the mix of quality of work life, when we finally get them agreed to, and we're all positive that that's going to happen at some point, one way or the other, that is going to be achievable, implementable, and it's going to help us all make our contribution to whatever United Next is going to bring for us.
It's manpower positive.
It is manpower positive.
All right. So Garth, a question here. How confident are you that in a future TA will include provisions to prevent the company from mandating any medical procedures, the body autonomy?
Well, that is a provision or an item that we have in our current proposals with the company. And I know that is a very important item to a number of people. It came out of several councils. I'm trying to remember the number, but it was more than half anyway of our councils provided that direction. So it is a very important item that I have confidence that we will carry through in the form of final language.
Phil, are you actually seeing the company wanting to get a deal? Or are they trying to preserve cash and limp through the summer before they get this deal?
Well, that's an interesting
question.
It's a
live question, by the way. It just came in.
It varies in levels and in how can I say this simply, right? The people that we talk to at the table are trying to get a deal. And I think their struggle is doing it on their terms or doing it on our terms. And that's why we're apart, quite simply. I think it's the simplest way to put it. As far as what we see in the press and at higher levels, again, Mr. Kirby's not at the table with us. I'm not sure where that recent valuation that he's put out in public, how he calculated that, or where exactly that number came from. I'm sure that'll be part of our ensuing conversations, as we are currently in active negotiations. That hasn't stopped. And we'll find out. But I think there's a balance on their part to, their struggle is maintaining what they see as the viability of the operation of the corporation while they negotiate with us and temper their arguments for what they believe they can agree to or not. And we're countering that at every opportunity.
Yeah, just a point for me, it's kind of interesting. So he comes out with the $8 billion in the article yesterday in Bloomberg, which was then amended when we talked to them and they said, oh, wait, you're right. There may be a costing situation there that is not exactly right.
Yeah, we don't know which growth model they've used, perhaps, or they compared. I think he compared it to Delta's contract value. They have a different growth model. These are all subtleties, but they make a difference. At the end of the day, the contract is going to cost what it costs, and if it's what we need for it to be industry leading and ratifiable by our pilot group, it's gonna cost whatever. Now they can say it costs one thing, we can say it costs another, and it really doesn't matter at the end of the day.
Question for both you and Dave is kind of a twofer. First, can you tell me about the tone at the table? What's the tone? How do you feel when you're talking to them? What's your reaction when you pass? In fact, we just did a huge pass of more than 50 items. Mm-hmm. How do they take that? How do you guys feel when you're getting feedback from the company side? How does that work?
So without digging back too far and too deeply and too much detail, maybe a little bit of a vignette or, a short story. One of the I've seen this time and time again in negotiating is that when either side presents a package or a pass, especially a large one like that, there's a bit of a triumphant feeling that you've done something reasonable. The other side should just be blown away by the brilliance of your pass and should just agree to it right away. Right? I think both sides suffer from that to some degree. So that leads to a little bit of ups and downs in feeling and tone. So when we've made a pass, maybe we feel very positive and we see a little bit of negativity on the other side. But what I will say that's been happening with a fair amount of regularity, we'll have some communications that go out that'll describe the nature of a pass we've received, but we continue to negotiate. The progress, I think, has slowed quite a bit as the item count diminishes. That's normal. It's frustrating at times because it really appears to almost grind to a halt when we can only report a little bit of progress at the end of a long week of negotiations. And so that tone kind of drives things from either negative on one side or positive on the other to kind of in the middle somewhere while we struggle with trying to continue to push forward. But I wouldn't say yet that we've seen a reluctance to continue negotiations or conversations. And so neutral to slightly positive, I suppose, if I had to kind of describe where the needle lies right now. We're not seeing any reticence to continue negotiating at this time.
So in that same vein, it's the same pilot, Dave, and he asked, what can I do to help get this finished?
Great question. Don't let the frustration overcome you to the point of feeling that your actions are meaningless. Specifically, something as simple as a lanyard. And I know people are probably sick and tired about hearing it. Simple fact is it just demonstrates the unity, and it demonstrates that the communication has occurred from the pilot to the leadership and back. And there's many ways to display that solidarity, but that's the simplest one and probably one of the more meaningful, shockingly.
Let's bring Andy Riggs back in with a scheduling question here. How is the topic of reassignment being addressed? Is there any meaningful attempts to limit their ability to reassign line holders? Or are we going to just slap a few bucks on it and give them free rein?
Yeah, thank you. Reassignments is definitely a big topic for us. It comes in the form of quality of work life that our pilots have indicated via surveying and polling data and thousands of PDRs, frankly, to the SSC. One of the issues with reassignments, they affect all of our airlines, us, Delta, American, and the tongue-in-cheek slap a few dollars on it that really describes maybe the approach that other people have come with at our peer airlines. It's something that we're looking to actually attack the quality of work-life impact. Our pilots have spoken loud and clear that their time off is valuable and their time on the trip is valuable. So we're seeking things that we can gain in negotiations that protect their time while on a trip, and then especially protect their time off in the way of day off restoration or even preventing reassignments that disrupt a pilot's days off. So that's first and foremost our concern.
So Garth, we had the pandemic LOA, and this is a question that concerns that. What happened contractually with the 5% raise that was part of the pandemic LOA, and that has the company started double counting that for the new contract?
Well, yeah, we've seen it in the media that they've put out there that they have 18% on the table, and they're lumping in the 5% that we already received for the pandemic LOA. And I just want to back up and go over what we did to get that 5%. Right? We agreed to provisions in the pandemic LOA that lowered our guarantees and gave the company quite a bit of flexibility, more so than most airlines, to rapidly respond to the return of travel demand. And in return, we got an agreement to have a future pay raise of 5%, which we've received already. To me, that was something bought and paid for already. And so for them to actually lump it in as a down payment for the next contract, or to be included in certainly costed as far as, in the next contract is not appropriate.
And you've seen pushback on that?
So I think that with the passage of time, quite frankly, I think that the costing that we're seeing, we've been able to hold the line at looking at what is the pay rate going to be going forward, right? We're not being charged for whatever that 5% cost when it was accounted for, when it was agreed to. At first, there was some confusion over that, and I think part of the clarifications that Garth is speaking to have done their job, and we're not seeing that at the table. We're no longer being told, it's if 13% is the offer, it's really 18% as the example that Garth brought. We're not being told that anymore.
So at the table,
the
media,
table.
different
media,
story.
something else. So and I guess the point is that's been our insistence on starting from, hey, the 0 point is on top of the 5%.
There's that whole costing issue all over again, right?
Yeah.
So Garth, a question about Continental pilots, the legacy Continental pilots, and their long-term disability plan. Is it part of this deal? Is it part of an LOA? How's that going to be handled?
Right. When I spoke at the Council 171 meeting, it was evident that is a sensitive topic with the former Continental pilots. And most of that group was not happy with the fact that it was lumped into the first tentative agreement, and pilots that weren't involved in that issue were in fact voting in part on their long-term disability, refund of excess funds. And so that this time around will not be a part of the tentative agreement. It will be a separate side letter. That is a high priority for us.
Dave, I have a question here from a pilot. Because of the delay, or the assumed delay, in taking the strike vote, are we losing any summer leverage that we've had?
Another good question. I mean, my primary purpose and my team is, again, to provide leverage to Capt and Otis, and also to provide unity. So the question is, what happened to the leverage for the summer as it drags on and we don't have an agreement? Am I losing the ability to provide that? And the answer is, well, yes and no. What I mean is, obviously, the passage of time is certainly an issue that is costing the pilots every day. And we understand that. Obviously, the company probably doesn't understand that as well, or maybe they do because it's saving them that. But in terms of the long-term piece of it and our strategic plan, the MEC strategic plan, we have it designed out to maximize the leverage that we can provide Capt and Otis.
So only because I watch you work on this, just a second question to you is, what will it take to start flooding new hires, recurrent, upgrade, and all the pilots that are at TK? And I think they put out the deal. We have 900 hotel rooms every single night. How do we start addressing those pilots?
Well, I think the P2P deployment that we've undergone at Denver TK, which will start up again next week, we have found to be an incredibly, again, valuable asset for us. And to provide the new hire pilot with the information about where we're at, where we're going, and the tools we have, and how they can participate themselves in providing the unity. While they may not have a vote per se, their presence and importance is top priority for us to ensure that their voices are heard as much as possible in providing our leverage.
Do you mind if I
Please
chip in here?
Yeah.
There's been a lot of talk about the number of pilots that we've hired. in the last few years, and that many pilots in our group have never been through a contract negotiation, have never been through this process, and some might feel that's a liability. But in the polling we've been conducting and in the turnout for the events that we've had, the junior pilots are with us. The young pilots are with us. There is no problem there in my mind. They're just as active and engaged as every other segment in our demographic, and that's encouraging. In fact, I think our United Board of Directors picket, didn't we have a
12.
dozen?
Yeah,
We had a
12.
dozen half-wingers at that picket.
Out of 60.
Out of 58, 60. So that was
A
fantastic.
disproportionate
We have a
change.
very engaged junior and young group, which is good to see.
And I just for you guys to know, hundreds of questions are still coming in. So I truly appreciate the participation from pilots. The podcast to answer all of the questions we don't get to tonight will maybe take the whole day.
Wow.
Well, and Dave, talking about that, can you please speak to pilots about, and this is a status quo. I know we did a piece on this in our education campaign about pilots picking up open time. You know, what?
Yeah, I saw one of the questions went more in depth than just that. We've covered status quo not only incredibly in depth on the website with the negotiation and the RLA button, but we did the podcast as well with First Officer Fleming. And so, the simple answer is we don't want to find ourselves in the situation of a TRO. That will not be a good place to be. We've been there before. It proved not too useful for us. I just think that the simple overlying direction that I would give my fellow pilots would be do what you've always done. You know, there's no way that the company is going to lose some sort of pointing out of the metrics changing because they have all the data. But the reality is the operation is performing just fine. And I'm not going to tell somebody what to do with their life other than please be unified.
So two parts on that. Can you define a TRO for the pilots that just don't know what that is?
Yeah, no. Like I say, the in-depth would be on the website, but basically, if a change in behavior of the pilot group were to be detected in any way, shape, or form, literally, whether it be an on-time rate or fuel usage or all these metrics that we know are tracked to the micron, that would allow the company to say that the status quo has been violated. And they would gather the data, go before a judge, and if that judge were to place a TRO on the union, they'd probably win. And so I just think that concept of changing your behavior to force the company to give leverage to fill is certainly just kind of old school.
And just a follow-up question from a pilot here is the idea of taking hostages.
Yeah, that's a huge problem because then they have a value that will have to be expended from Phil's pool that to get them back. And so it serves no purpose.
Garth, a live question here. In addition to the age 67 provision in the FAA reauthorization bill, cockpit video recorders by 2030 are now included in the current language. Can you talk about what you've had the discussions with Jason Ambrosio up at National and how you're going to fight this?
Yeah, we do know that they are fighting that on the national level. I have gotten conflicting messages today on where we are with the video recorders and the success of that. So I'm afraid to say I'm a little behind on the news cycle for that, but obviously that's a provision that we find very objectionable and we'll fight at every stop.
Andy Riggs, there are thousands of PDRs filed every year, and they used to show all the inefficiencies in our current contract. Can you tell me how you use this as hard evidence of what does not work and what needs to be fixed in contract negotiations?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Thanks, Michael. in a previous life, just 6 weeks ago, as a member of the System Schedule Committee, serving as Alpha Crew Desk pilot, myself and several others received on order of 7,000 PDRs a year that we researched, reviewed, and responded to. And each one of those PDRs, we don't have form answers. It was suggested long ago that maybe we could do some cookie cutter answers, and we resisted that because every pilot situation is different. There's different details and different provisions of the contract that come into play. So each one of those is answered individually. Each one of those situations represents a pilot with a situation or a problem out there. And we have the ability to archive and look at those issues. And those are addressed at a monthly System Schedule Committee meeting, interactions with the company. But the big Super Bowl of where we can answer those is at the negotiating table. That's our chance to right wrongs, to fix things going forward, to fix things in contractual language, and to repair those issues so that those problems do not present themselves again. So we take those issues through PDRs. The PDR system is excellent for reporting what doesn't work. Every once in a while we get a PDR about what's working out there. But the PDR system is excellent for what doesn't work. Polling and survey data provides us feedback on what pilots like and in addition to what pilots don't like. So we take that information forward at the negotiating table. And instead of just speaking in abstract, we want something that Delta has, or we want an improvement in this area, we're able to pull up those PDRs and those screenshots and that data and sit down with the company, explain exactly what we're trying to fix. And in some cases, even the company looks at it and goes, yeah, that's pretty egregious. So we can see why you want to fix that. So that's how we use that PDR data going forward.
Phil, to you, as sections are being agreed upon in negotiations, is the final language being worked on as well?
So the quick answer is yes. The way that project works, obviously, as we close out a particular, and it might not be an entire section, but it might be an item or several items, we will start having our language team, which consists of not only the negotiators, but some of our ALPA staff that assist us, go ahead and start crafting the language. In many cases, that language has also already been worked on and agreed to by the company. So it's set aside in an effort to reduce the gap from the date where we expect to have an agreement in principle and are able to provide a full language tentative agreement for consideration.
And just to follow on from that same pilot, just in addition to you're doing these big package deals now, do you have an estimation of how long the wait will be once an AIP is there for the language to complete?
So ironically, there's a little yin and yang there. If the packages go quickly, we'll need a little more time to finish the language. Some of these new, more complicated provisions, because they haven't been agreed to, we haven't been able to sit down and actually hammer out the language specifically with the company. Sometimes language writing reveals shortcomings in proposals, and shortcomings is the wrong word. Areas that weren't fully perhaps discussed and can take a little while. Even so, we're still working on those areas to make sure that our proposals are as detailed as possible. In fact, there's some areas in the current proposals that we have passed back and forth and have shared with our MEC that have a lot of detail so that we have a better understanding when we say, yes, we agree to that the language will be less difficult to craft. We don't want the packages to take a long time to come to fruition, to come to agreement. But of course, in that case, we'll have also the ability, the bandwidth to work on language while we're putting those packages together and getting them agreed to. So it goes together. I really hate to give an estimate for how long that's going to take, other than that we can point to what we're seeing with our peers. Delta took roughly about a month to finish up their final language after their agreement, and that's not atypical for especially for a comprehensive change to so many areas of an agreement. We really want to get the language right. We don't want to rush that project.
So just a quick note to all the pilots that are tuned in. I know that some of you can't stay for the whole hour and a half. This is being recorded. It'll be placed on the MEC website, so you can watch it in its entirety again. And Phil, just back to you. The line check pilot override, what does that look like?
So again, without sharing too many details, it is a substantial increase, and it is going to be paid for an entire trip We've also introduced some new elements, such as a guarantee for that override that do not exist under our current book or at our competitors. So we believe that when that comes to fruition in final language, the line check pilots will be very happy to see the improvements not only to our own program, but how it compares to our competitors.
So just a quick note here for everybody, 2,220 pilots in now. No pressure. So as we go forward here, another quick negotiation deal. We say we've addressed in the last negotiating committee update, we have now addressed nearly all open items with the company except for compensation. Does this mean that the negotiating committee has addressed the open items with the company, or they've addressed the open items within ALPA from the company?
And I think I understand the question. Not 100% sure, but I'll give it my best shot. So those 50 items represent items that were part of either our initial proposal to the company last February, or items that came from the company and their initial counters to our passes back then. So they're from both. So they're both items that ALPA has proposed, also items that the company has proposed or countered to and made some changes to. That's a normal process of negotiations and going back and forth, but typically, and maybe this is the confusion with the question, typically we'll pass by section. So there'll be section 5 proposals, section 20 proposal, maybe some smaller sections are combined. However, in this particular case, we've made a comprehensive proposal with a few remaining items in many sections, most of them in 5 and 20, and with the exception of compensation, and put those into one package that incorporates everything that is still open and not agreed to yet.
I'll add to that real quick. It caused some confusion a little bit with the last update, meaning that we intentionally didn't go there with compensation. The Section 3 language, or the last proposal, was made by the union. So it is in the company's hands, and typically we are awaiting a proposal from the company on that issue. So,
Garth, you're a very frequent critic of the heavy-handedness of discipline. And this also relates to the COVID-19 vaccination mandate. What specifically do you plan to do to support the United pilots in regards to those pilots who were terminated or placed on a leave of absence after the September 27th, 2021 refusal of the 100% mandatory COVID-19 vaccination?
Yeah. Well, as far as the pilots that were terminated, they are being represented. 2 of them have reached a settlement with the company and are back to work. The others are awaiting their system board hearings to have their day in front of the arbitration board. As far as the pilots that were held out during they had the reasonable accommodation process and were held out without pay, that generated a lot of activity at council meetings and the medical freedoms direction that we have been given, and that is on the table for negotiations.
Andy Riggs, is the elimination of global reserve and the creation of one reserve system across the network, so basically the elimination of the FDO, the RDO for all categories, something that's on the table? And is it a make or break for the current negotiations?
So to answer the first question, is the elimination or the delineation between global and basic reserve on the table? That we're not molding those 2 reserve types because the flying associated with both is very different. And our competitors also break those apart. What we are seeking to do, and to speak to the crux of the issue, is the rolling of days off at will, seemingly today. Today, our reserve system allows a crew desk to first choose what type of reserve they want to utilize, long call, short call, or field standby, and then attempt to match silo within that. And this frequently results in pilots having their days off rolled because they happen to be on short call, while a long call pilot who may be able to accept the assignment without days off being rolled is not utilized. This results in needless rolling of days off. That's something we're moving to attack with contractual language, with provisions that puts the priority on preservation of reserve days off. The reduction of day off rolling is what we'd expect to achieve with that language, as a company has constraints put on it and how they can go about rolling days off.
Dave Smith, recently the Supreme Court ruled against the Teamsters in the Glacier Northwest versus Teamsters. Does this case affect any self-help effort we might seek?
It was an interesting case, that along with the recent case history of the PEB for the railroads have been an item of study, certainly for the SPSC. In terms of the Glacier versus Teamsters, they are governed not by the Railway Labor Act, but by the National Labor Relations Act. So the NLRA is a whole different animal. So it doesn't apply per se to us. It's actually a pretty interesting decision to read if you're into that sort of thing. And I always enjoy reading the dissenting opinion. And Justice Jackson wrote that. And to me, that's more educational than just going along with the 8 other guys who said, this is what it is. But no, it doesn't affect us.
If you're into that sort of thing.
Sorry.
Garth, how does the FedEx TA impact our negotiations, if at all? Live question.
Yeah, it's similar to the American tentative agreement, and the question there. We'll certainly, as details come out on that tentative agreement, analyze it as there's anything gains that they've made that might be something that we want in our contract as well. But as far as us pausing or stopping or allowing their process to complete before we continue on with negotiations, we don't anticipate doing that.
Just like American.
Correct.
Andy, a CM Pool question here for you. The MEC and the negotiating committee have yet to indicate in communications that the negotiating committee are negotiating meaningful changes to our trip trading capability. We have some of the worst trip trading capability in the industry. It's nearly impossible to drop a trip, and the pool displays routinely show reserve coverage below. We need meaningful major changes. Is the negotiating committee actively negotiating for meaningful trip trade changes to improve our quality of life?
Okay, so to the first point there about the capability of our trip trade system, using data from the SSC, we reached out to our subject matter experts on trip trade and understand that approximately 250,000 trip trades are processed every year. And this year alone, we're on track to break those numbers by the beginning of the fourth quarter. So we should see record numbers of trip trades being processed. Obviously, every pilot that puts in a trip trade may not see that trip trade processed to their satisfaction. One of the reasons for that is every trip trade transaction that involves a drop of a trip has to have a recipient, whether that recipient is a fellow pilot or a trip dropping into open time. That's going to touch CM Pool. The way that we're attacking CM Pool is today CM Pool is set with a number of buffers attached because CM Pool only tracks the number of reserves available that day and doesn't get into granular detail on the actual availability of reserves on that day. For example, there may be 30 reserves available this Friday in a category, but it doesn't get to the granular detail of are those reserves 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, 4 day, and how many of each. And because of that, there's layers of buffer placed on those numbers for the CM Pool number that's used for trip trade to prevent all 4-day trips dropping or all 1-day trips dropping. As we seek to improve that CM Pool to go to an enhanced CM Pool is what we refer to it as, that will not only provide the granular detail for the trip trade system to accept and process additional trip trades, but to set realistic floors for CM Pool and for in real time trip trades that occur in the real-time system for the crew desk to be able to accept and process a trade that occurs after 11 a.m. the day prior.
Phil, a good question for you here is what's in a name? What is retro? And what is a signing bonus? And is that different?
Right. So I think the question is specifically regarding the change in the provision's name that appeared in the position report about 2 months ago. And that's something that we've struggled with, and also our peers have struggled with. However, the important part is that it's defined by the proposal. So we have very specifically determined in our proposal how we want that provision to pay. And so it still works exactly the same way as we were directed to do to achieve by the MEC. It's very similar to how Delta achieved theirs. And I'll jump in the weeds a little bit. I get a lot of questions, especially after the name change a couple months ago, from pilots that retired since the amendable date, but prior to what the expected date of signing will be of this agreement. They will be treated essentially the same way as we have proposed and as we have done in the past. Their active service will be accounted for, and I think that's the big worry. That's MEC direction, and we have not wavered from that. So I think the quick bottom line to the question is nothing has changed other than the name. Why did the name change? In order to get agreement to it. And this is, by the way, the biggest retro ask of any carrier that we're aware of in recent times. The valuation of that one item is when we're able to make that public, that is the biggest retro ask that ever been put on the table. And it is largely agreed to, but for a couple of provisions associated with it that we're still working on. So part of getting it agreed to was the naming of it. And there are some corporate compliance issues that honestly, maybe Garth can talk to them. I don't fully understand them. I'll just say that very straightforwardly, that prevented it from being called a retroactive payment and that they use this different terminology. Everybody listening, and please tell your friends, rest assured, there's no difference to what we proposed and how we proposed and how it applies.
No different impact to the pilot.
Correct.
No different tax implication. It's the same thing.
Good or bad, it's the same.
It's
right?
the same thing. And to roll right into it, because a live question that retro kind of addresses, Garth, is what's being done to prevent another delay of 5 years for a contract? Can you write something into the current contract negotiation to prevent this?
Yeah, I think the most important thing we can do to prevent it from happening next time is not have the company financially benefit from drawing this out. So retro is going to be a very important piece and a high priority item with this contract. That said, the Railway Labor Act can be a frustrating thing as far as this dragging out past an amendable date, even though we intend to get pay in retroactive measure. It doesn't stop the fact that we're going through another summer with the work rules as they are. How do you compensate for that? And so that is a frustration. I understand that you can get items in a contract that ensure certain items will be retroactive in the future, or that you will have mediation at some time frame. But to be honest, it's very difficult to stop, and you've seen this in the industry with most carriers. This going past the amendable date.
Just a note to the pilots: if you're trying to submit a question, and could be because they're still rolling in like crazy, and you're doing it on an iPhone, if you'll turn your iPhone into the landscape mode, the submit button will appear for you, just like magic. Captain Smith, can you please explain to the membership how volunteering for special assignment jobs, including maybe applying for an LCP position, solves the company's problem for them and hampers our ability to negotiate at the table?
Well, I'll go back to what you talked about with the TRO, and
right,
it's just that simple, and that is do what you've always done. What we don't want to have happen is hostage taking, and the members need to know very clearly that the company would reserve the right to independently go after a pilot. And so, we've had this problem before, so just do what you do.
Keep doing your job.
Yeah,
do your job. A live question, Garth. Does Scott Kirby realize the goodwill that Oscar built is rapidly and sadly slipping away from this pilot group, let alone the entire United employee group?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I've made that point to senior management repeatedly, in that the way we're going about getting this contract, regardless of the quality of that contract at the end, for every day and week and month that we go on past the amenable date, the more the pilots will resent how it had to come. No matter how good this contract is, I resent the fact that here we are 4.5 years past the amenable date and we're still having trouble, even though management said it would be a quick and easy thing to do, and that assets would be available in the form of SMEs and ability to get this done quickly. And yet here we are, we're talking about it. So it is a big thing. And oh, by the way, the flight attendants are a year and a half plus past their amenable date and having difficulty in their negotiations. So yes, I do believe that while our management team has done some good things in regards to running this company, where they are woefully short is the value they've placed on labor in the equation.
I'd just also add that every day that goes on, the company's doing our job in terms of unity and creating Alpha stalwarts and basically helping me do my job by their delay. The frustration is enormous on all of us, but nonetheless, I thank them for that part.
Who would have ever thought that just a couple of weeks would be a increase of Alpha volunteers? Is fantastic. Phil, without going into specifics, can you please characterize the current content of LTD improvements being discussed with the company and whether those improvements are intended to be only prospective or retroactive?
Yeah, understand. So two parts. So the first part I discussed earlier when I was addressing the issue of our sick leave program and how our pilots are poorly served by current provisions as compared to their Delta peers, specifically when we were talking about the Delta sick leave question. And that's where the improvements lie that we are proposing. The idea is that our pilots today are at risk of exhausting their sick leave, especially if they've had either multiple issues or an extended issue, and especially if they're a relatively new hire and have not built up very much time. That's a huge hole that the Delta program solves in different ways, and we have several provisions on the table to address that. As far as it being retroactive, the difference in our program is that we structured it years ago as an insurance product. So pilots pay a premium for a certain level of insurance. It is difficult to go back and increase the benefit for somebody currently on a program that they paid a lower premium for. And one thing that we're certainly not interested in doing is somehow reaching back and charging them more retroactively for a higher coverage amount. However, that is something that we have studied. I illustrate that only as a difficulty in how to retroactively apply a benefit to a premium-driven program. That said, going forward, we think the improvements will be very substantial and very appreciated.
Garth, it seems like the new live question, by the way, it seems like the new uniforms were a distraction, but could you briefly speak about this? The new ones are not largely liked, it doesn't seem, by the membership, and are an obvious attempt to devalue our work group.
So I've been told. Funny thing is, I was tabbed. I was a wear tester back in previous wear tests, and they kept wanting me to update my address to send my uniform so I could wear it in the MEC office, I guess. So I finally got around to telling them that I think I'll opt out this time around.
That's why you have that hat in there now, I know.
Yeah, right. But understand this, our uniform committee has been very vocal, and they are taking the input they're receiving from PDRs and certainly will from the wear test. That said, they cannot stop the wear test from happening, but we do retain the contractual right to approve any alterations or changes to the uniform, and that still exists.
All right. So another question for you is, why do you think the company has not filed for mediation?
Well, Yeah, I'll be blunt about it. I believe the company is in a bit of a time crunch, largely driven by their need to have manpower to fuel their United Next growth strategy. I think they would like, just as we would, to have an agreement that is negotiated quickly, and they probably can't get in their minds, don't know what their true motivations are. But I think that's why they have not filed for mediation, is that they feel some time sensitivity themselves. And so that's where I think it's at with them. Well, could they prove me wrong and turn around and file for mediation? Possibly, but that's at least my hunch on it, that they have a fairly big time crunch right now because they have ambitious growth plans that they've staked their reputations on and their incentive compensation plans on, and they can't staff the airline going forward if they continue on with, I think yesterday's close had 96 unfilled captain vacancies. It's a problem.
Sounds like United Next mediocre. Andy Riggs, reserve life is miserable. And with the flexibility scheduling exploits from the crew desk, and it's difficult to make over 73 to 76 hours of pay. I hear my reserve peers at other airlines, they have the ability to trade reserve days via electronic means. They can pick up premium pay on days off. And they have a call me last feature. I think they have that at Delta, they say, which tends to make reserve go more senior. Are we negotiating for reserve rules similar to these?
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, we're unable to get into a lot of the specifics because we're in active negotiations. But speaking specifically to the reserve day off trades, we've talked about that, that we are looking to go to an electronic means of day off trades, which should increase a reserve's ability to modify their schedule. As far as pay while on reserve for a day's work, we are pursuing increases in a reserve's ability to earn and be fairly compensated for the work that they do, while also pursuing additional opportunities for days off for reserves. That's something that our peer airlines have not been able to do. We see opportunities for additional pay, but we're also looking for the quality work-life balance that our reserves and our line pilots are asking for in the way of additional time off. And that's what we're looking to pursue as well.
So just to follow that up with another question that just came in as a live question, if more days off are granted to reserves, what impact, if any, would be on scheduling's ability to reassign a line holder? In other words, would scheduling require less steps for line holder reassignment than the current book, or would this new balance of additional reserve days off mess with those things?
And so we would never pursue a binary improvement where something that benefits one section of the pilot group is to the detriment of another section of the pilot group, whether that be line holders and reserves, junior or senior. So there are opportunities to increase quality of work life for our reserve pilots, not at the expense of that for our line holders. An example of that is there's an opportunity to provide more time off for reserves. And that doesn't necessarily mean that someone else on the property today, as far as a line holder, has to pick up the slack or will be reassigned more. Another avenue, and this is frankly costly in negotiations, but the company can bring on additional heads that will fill that gap. So as a company adds staffing, and we've talked about this in the way of sick leave, of vacation, any item that requires more hours for the pilot group, you can do that one or two ways. Everybody can work harder, or we can bring on additional staffing. And that's more the avenue that we look to, rather than shouldering the burden from someone else because another subset has achieved a benefit under the contract.
Phil, regarding retro as it applies to line check pilot work, will the new LCP override be applied to LCP work within the retro time envelope?
So so the retroactive pay component will apply to everybody, right? As proposed and as directed by the MEC, and as we expect to eventually achieve, there's a W-2 based element to retro. As far as the increase in the override, and I think that's really what the question is about, as I understand it, there's an amount of retro associated with that was agreed to previously, and we're carrying that amount forward in our proposal.
So a follow-up question to that, just on another retro that came in, is will pilots receive the retro pay during their time that they were on probation? That's counted, correct?
Yes, that's just looking to make sure that where did my fact expert? Adrian?
Yes. Awesome. Garth, can you talk a little bit about the current status of the system board today as it relates to the cancellation of the COVID LOA?
Yeah, that we would like to be negotiating this week, but we're not presently because many of the company members of the negotiating team have been arguing against us in a system board arbitration hearing that involves the COVID MOU that we feel the company canceled or drew down prematurely. The language in the COVID MOU states that the CDC must declare an end to the pandemic, which they have not. And so we filed a grievance. In the meantime, we have several pilots that are suffering long haul symptoms from COVID that had been on full pay in accordance with the COVID MRU that have now been transitioned to long-term disability. And it remains to be seen whether or not we can alter that or not. But that's where we're at today and yesterday. We've been in that system board proceedings. Hopefully we're able to move on from that and continue negotiating late this week and into next week. And it's tough to say how long it'll take to have the arbitration ruling on the matter. So it might be a matter of several weeks before we know.
I understand you got to get the transcript. They go through it with the attorneys and they make that decision from there. And that follows into a question of, do the attorneys run this place?
No, we do have, and I don't want to discount the fact that we have several very loyal and long-serving attorneys serving the association, including in our MEC office. And so we value their guidance and their input. However, the pilots do and will continue to make the policy decisions and in every decision regarding how this association is run. Certainly, we will lean on the guidance of people that have the experience and education to give us legal advice, but that is not in and of itself a decision.
For you and Phil on this, does the company realize that with a new contract and with new quality of work-life improvements, that will actually help solve the captain vacancy problem? Do they see that as true?
Yeah, well, okay. So I see it as true. And I believe our negotiating.
So do I.
Yes.
Me too.
The company remains skeptical that work rule improvements alone will completely solve their captain vacancy problem. And that is a problem at the table. They want assurances or stopgaps that are absolute. And many of these, would be in the form of something that we can't accept. My statements, not only at the negotiating table, but to members of very senior management recently, have been that you solve the quality of work life issues in our contract, that will take care of most of your numbers, and any other shortfalls speaks to goodwill. We talked about that before. You have a pilot group that feels valued and feel like, we are finally pulling on the same end of the rope. We want this company to grow and prosper just like they do. And I feel that, you take care of the contract, you will take care of the problem. And we won't have a captain problem once we get there.
Phil, you're seeing that same thing at the negotiating table?
So that is currently a huge topic of conversation. That it really has risen probably to the top, if not the very top of the 50 or so items. Really, it's just a handful that are of such significant philosophical importance that we're spending a lot of time discussing them. That is their biggest worry, I believe, in terms of executing their plan of United Next. Right, they need to be able to fill those vacancy positions, the left seats of all the cockpits of the new airplanes that are coming on board. So yeah, those conversations will continue, and Garth is directly involved with us in those conversations, as well as our SMEs, our training and safety committee subject matter experts that are very well versed in all of those topics. We're putting a lot of focus on that topic to preserve our contractual protections and do the right thing for pilots that are interested in those positions. And we continue to believe that the improvements that we have on the table, plus some of the ones that are still in open negotiations, not just the ones that have been agreed to, once that's in place and out there, it's going to make a huge difference in terms of interest out there from our pilots that are, for now anyway, avoiding bidding those positions.
And I'll just, add on to that. COVID has changed the way a lot of workers feel about work-life balance, and our pilot group is no different. And we've seen that in the input we've received, and we've seen that in the decisions they've made in their schedule bidding and equipment vacancy bidding. The company just needs to come to the realization of that fact and address the needs for work-life balance before they get what they need in the form of captain vacancy bids.
Well, I mean, they're just having vacancy bids every month. You think they would catch the picture. Dave Smith, the question, why no public outreach on TV, billboards around airports showing United management that Scott is no good?
Like I say, part of the strategic plan, which, some of it is still out there ways in terms of coming public with anything for strategic reasons. We are embarking on a billboard plan. Our pilots spoke to us. Their leadership has directed us. So we are executing on that plan, and they should see something soon. We'll just say, in terms of, other meaningful showing of unity, we've got many things out there, including new bag tag, which they may like. Yeah.
Very nice. Don't drink the Kool-Aid.
Right. And there's many facets to the strategic plan. Some of them, like say from flash picketing, we're going to hold that close to our chest because it's very impactful to send our message to those that need to hear it. And there'll be a lot more.
The board of directors meeting was a great example of that. They got to see it up front. Andy Riggs, significant effort is being made to improve quality of life for reserves and protect days off for line holders, which I appreciate. However, scheduling flexibility doesn't seem to be a major area of concern during negotiations, especially on the narrow body. The ability to push line values to 90 hours with 12 to 13 days off for many, but the most senior line holders of the company given more latitude, like exists with Delta. Any other carriers using a non-newer globalized PBS system with significant contractual administration constraints on PBS runs. Furthermore, there's been no mention of restricting the ability to set required reserve levels with limits for the ability to drop and trip trade for the vast majority. Can you speak to the quality of life negotiating plans to fix this?
Yes, I'll start with the ability of flex line holder constraints to where line holders can be assigned 90 hours. Again, without being able to get into a lot of granular detail because of active negotiations, the ways that we combat poor schedule construction, poor pairing construction, things of that nature are through a set of rules that we call parameters. Most of the time, those are fueled through rigs, trip rigs, duty rigs, things of that nature. And a phrase that Kyle Opp from the SSC has coined is these are like building a house, and you can't just build walls around the house. You also have to build a roof and a basement, because the optimizer that builds these pairings, for example, if you're looking to avoid long sits and you were to define a long sit as 3 hours, the system is very smart in that you could penalize a long sit by adding some ad pay to that, and you will then see a number of pairings built with sit times that are right up to that limit, 2 hours 58, 2 hours 59, because the system can, it's like a worm. It can figure out a way to make that happen. So the combination of these different trip rigs, because one trip rig or one work rule doesn't prevent a a poor pairing construction. So what we look to do is we institute a work rule and see how the optimizer reacts to that. And if there's something adverse that happens in another area, we work to prevent that. The combination of all those items not only produces better quality pairings, which produce better quality lines, but the aggregate of that with increased credit and pays associated with those rigs prevents the company from assigning us right up to the minimum number of days off. And that's what we look to see going forward in negotiations. That's our goal, that's the construction of better trips creates better quality lines. Now, as far as PBS, what's happening there and why you haven't seen a lot of that with regard to Section 6 negotiations, PBS improvements, the system improvements, and a complete overhaul of the face of PBS is being conducted outside of Section 6 negotiations. And with that, due to the cost of that programming, is not locked into the overall cost of our contract. Speaking to our PBS subject matter experts in the SSC, they have been working on this project. A team of volunteers with expertise throughout the industry is working on this project, and we expect to see something roll out, meaningful change there sometime after the first of the year in conjunction with the UPA.
Okay, so we're in the last 5 minutes. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to go to a quick wrap up with everyone. Garth, I think this needs to go to you. We received an update not too long ago discussing an open item in Section 23 that had to do with instructors flying as PIC. I know we have a lot of instructors ready to activate their captain bid back to the line if instructors are not given the option to fly as the PIC while instructing. Can you discuss where this stands? And also if job share for certain percentage of instructors is still on the table?
Last bit of the question first. Yes, job share is on the table, and I anticipate that will become part of our agreement. The bit about instructors flying as captain has been a frequent topic of conversation, not only as far as input I've received, but input and discussion at the table at the MEC. And the MEC has had some safety concerns regarding more in the realm of inexperience in the left seat, whether it be out on the line or at the training center. And so that's a topic of conversation right now with a group that we've put together to speak with management, flight ops management, and our training committee, systems or Central Air Safety Committee, I should say, and negotiating committee. They met, in fact, today to speak to that issue. So all I can say right now is it's still a matter of negotiations where that will end up. I do envision that there will be some provisions where instructors will be allowed to fly as captain. Whether they all will be, that remains to be seen.
So as we start to wrap up, Captain Smith, SPSC, unity?
For sure. You know, we're obviously going to embark on an aggressive education campaign for the strike authorization vote. I want to make sure that everyone understands the significance of their decision and ensure that our goal is 100% participation and 100% yes vote. There's a lot of parameters to how it goes forth, and we will provide that both through our website and I'm sure emails or at least updates to the membership via the MEC. And in terms of the unity piece, absolutely. There's lots of ways to display it. I'm not a lanyard guy, never have been, but and I know they're not the quality we would all wish, but most importantly is that color. You walk through the terminal, you know that the message has been received. And lastly, I'll just say the unspoken heroes, the communications committee, who worked so hard to do this. It was your May 12th, if you will. You didn't quite get as many participants as I did, but nonetheless, I really want to thank the membership for making an incredibly meaningful statement on May 12th. And thanks to your committee, sir.
The biggest event in ALPA history. Fantastic. Phil, you came in with top 3 things to talk about. Can you give me a summation of how you feel of where we are at the table? How you feel going forward the next couple of weeks?
Sure, Michael. Actually, the top 3 I was supposed to start with. But I think we've addressed them all. And they were the top questions that have been coming in. And I wanted to make sure they got addressed tonight. And I believe they all did. So I'm happy with that and happy for the question. Thank you. If there's anything, one question that I didn't answer that has come up with us before is everything that we're doing as pilots, what's helping you? What can we do to help? And really it's staying engaged and participating in the events as they come into play. It's hard sometimes to see a direct result of those actions. Like I can't tell you, for instance, that May 12th resulted in an extraordinary change in a pass the company might have given us back, immediately following that. However, where it's really helping us, quite frankly, is the credibility that we carry to the table when we say we know what our pilots want and we know what they're concerned about. We know where to go forward. That hasn't always been the case. That's been a growing process through these negotiations. And it has certainly helped us at least whittle down from where we were 5 months ago at 320 plus items down to the 50 or so that we're working on now. That is everything that everybody has been doing publicly to support us has helped us get to that point.
Fantastic. Captain Thompson.
That's it.
It's your
Just
turn, brother.
Well, first I want to say great job tonight, Michael. This event has been a heavy lift for the communications committee and especially you. And I think you did a great job tonight. I just want to thank everybody that's tuned in today. Thank you for your involvement. Thank you for leaning in. As Captain Smith alluded, May 12 was certainly gratifying to see where this pilot group is. To the extent that we can remain together, remain resolved, remain unified, that's what gives us our strength. That's what will give us the contract that you deserve. And thanks for tuning in tonight. I very much appreciate it.
So we're out of time, and 2,500 pilots that tuned in to listen to this is pretty spectacular. And I appreciate you. This was a genuine attempt at your cornerstone of transparency to give information as much as possible to the pilot group. Reminder, this is all recorded. It'll be posted on the MEC website. We're going to take all the remaining questions, and I think we had another 300 or 400 come in just during this, and we're going to try to answer them all in a podcast. And that's just going to be a huge podcast. So maybe a Transcon podcast. I appreciate your time. Again, I'm Michael Wilson, the Communications Committee Chairman. Have a very good night.